Hey everyone, and welcome back to StefanTests. You might remember a while back that I took a look at Intel's NUC 6. Today though, we're taking a look at something a little bit newer, Intel's NUC 7. Now, the NUC 7 uses the same 4" by 4" form factor that its predecessor did, and this is also quite a common form factor amongst other mini PCs from the likes of Minis Forum and E-Link today. This makes the NUC 7 ideal for its intended use case of being used in the workplace for the likes of office type applications, that kind of thing, and also for great use in the home for maybe like a mini PC that you would put behind your TV if you wanted to use something like that for watching movies, TV shows, that kind of thing. Although this is StefanTests, so we are going to be doing some gaming on it later on as well. But before we get into that, let's have a look at what you actually get with the NUC 7. So looking at the front first, we have two USB 3.0 ports, a combination headphone microphone jack, the power button, and you might also notice a little hole on the side of the power button and one next to the USB 3.0 port as well. These are actually inbuilt microphones, although personally I wouldn't recommend using them. Even a cheap USB mic is bound to be better quality than those are. Moving towards the back though, and we have the 19 volt DC input jack, an HDMI 2.0A port, a gigabit Ethernet port, two more USB 3.0 ports, and a single 10 gig USB Type-C port. This also actually supports DisplayPort Alt mode, so that in combination with the HDMI 2.0 port will actually let you use a multi-monitor setup, which is pretty cool for something this size. One thing I think is missing from the back though is a second, or even if they actually moved the combination headphone microphone jack to the back, I think that would be a lot better, because not everyone's going to want the speaker cable hanging out the front like that. I think it would have looked a lot more neater if they'd had the headphone microphone jack at the back there. There's nothing much to speak about on the sides, just a Kensington lock on one side and a micro SD slot on the other. In terms of looks though, I'm actually really impressed with how it looks. It's an all metal construction, apart from the top panel here, which is made of plastic. That is a major fingerprint magnet as well though. But what about the specs? Well, this particular NUC 7 comes as configured with an i3 7100U. This is essentially just a laptop part. It's a 2.4 GHz dual-core hyper-threaded chip with a TDP of up to only 15 watts. We also have 4 gigs of DDR4 RAM, single channel though, and a 120 gig M.2 SATA SSD. Although undoing the 4 screws on the bottom of this gives you easy access to the 2 SODIMM slots, which you can put up to 32 gigs in total in. I've upgraded it to 8 gigs for these tests though, and a 256 gig NVMe SSD. We also get built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as well, which is pretty convenient. Although if you have this sitting on your desk and have easy access to your router, then there's also the gigabit Ethernet port as well. All that said and done though, it's time to get an OS on this side and see what it's like to use and try out a few games on it as well. So we're having a look in the BIOS first, and the kind of user the NUC 7 is aimed at isn't going to be spending much, if any time at all, inside the BIOS of this thing. But I wanted to get a good look at it first, because if you do end up spending some time in the BIOS, it's good to know what it's actually like to use. And in general, I'm actually quite impressed with it, to be honest. All of the options are in a place that actually makes sense for them. Generally, moving around the BIOS is quite smooth and responsive. Mouse movement is nice and smooth. Keyboard is nice and smooth. There's no kind of lag in the controls or anything like that. It's a generally pleasant place to be if you end up in the BIOS. There were also a couple of options which I was quite impressed the BIOS of this actually had. And these are options to configure the memory timings, which again, for the type of user the NUC 7 is aimed at, isn't particularly important, or at all for that matter. But it's nice that it's there if you want to eke out that last couple of percentage points of performance. Another couple of options which are quite useful for the NUC 7's target market are the ability to configure the NUC 7 to turn on and off a TV when the NUC 7 itself actually powers on or switches off. And you can also actually configure the TV to turn the NUC 7 itself on, which is fantastic if you want to use this as like a media center PC. General usage though is no issue at all for the NUC 7 here. Just browsing the desktop in general actually seems pretty responsive, especially considering the size of this thing. The sort of target use cases of this, though, the more office type applications, are going to be no issue as well. I only did some basic typing, but it had no issues with that. It launched the program perfectly fine. That would also extend to things like Excel, PowerPoint, although as you get deeper into things like Excel and start making bigger and bigger spreadsheets, it may start to struggle there. But those of you in the audience who might know more about spreadsheets and the kind of specs heavy office use tends to need, might have a better idea of that. But otherwise, browsing the internet is no issue at all. I even went onto YouTube, and I was expecting only up to 1080p 60 on YouTube, but just for fun I gave 4K 60 a try as well, and those actually ran with no issues at all. No dropped frames or anything, which we're able to see through the Stats for Nerds thing if you know about that option on YouTube. That in particular is going to be very useful to the media center market, because if you have a big 4K TV, you can just get this little NUC 7, which is, last time I checked, you could get for about £70. But if you have a big 4K TV, you can watch 4K 60 YouTube on this with no drop frames at all, which is pretty impressive. When it comes to games, though, that's where we see the NUC 7 really start to struggle. It's not aimed at the gaming market at all, so it's not something that was ever meant to be able to do. But like I said, we had to test some games on it anyway, just to see how they ran. GTA 5 here, which I ran at 720p with the lowest settings and some I&I tweaks as well to get the performance to run a bit smoother. Although the game is still technically playable, there are some slight hitches and stuttering throughout the game at various points. FPS does dip below 30 on a number of occasions, and even dips to around the low 20s FPS wise. The problems are nothing intrusive, but considering what it's actually running on, the fact it's even semi playable is actually still quite impressive, to be honest. I mean, it's basically the lowest end i3 7th gen laptop CPU you can get, so the fact that it's running on that, including the built-in HD 620 graphics, is actually still pretty impressive, all things considered. One thing I found particularly impressive though was, if you have a look at the power draw up here, we're looking at roughly 15-ish watts, give or take a few watts. I later found out this is not actually just the CPU power consumption. I thought it was at first, but this actually includes the power consumption of the iGPU as well, the HD 620 that is. So for the CPU and iGPU combination combined to be able to use only roughly 15 watts at absolute maximum load, again, that's pretty impressive. 15 watts for the kind of performance we're getting, not bad. I also had a go at running Overwatch 2 as well. I thought that would be a bit more performant than GT 5. I don't even know if performant is even a word, but hopefully you get what I mean. But I ran this at 720p, again for the lowest settings, FXAA to deal with the worst of the jagged edges. I also put a 30 FPS cap in place because the frame rate could be quite unstable, so that could potentially lead to what appears to be stuttering, so capping that to a 30 FPS frame rate manages to deal with the absolute worst of that. And overall, it does manage to stick to the 30 FPS cap for the most part. It could even dip to the low 20s in the most intense action, so think close combat, things like that. And there is some noticeable stuttering when this happens, which could potentially affect combat. There's also the brief occasional hitch as well, but the game does still manage to remain playable enough for me to be competitive. Not tooting my own horn or anything, but in the first game I played, I did manage to top the leaderboards, so it's obviously doing something right. No benchmark figures for this one though, because I couldn't reliably start the benchmark. So yeah, I wasn't actually able to record any figures, but hopefully you get an idea of the performance by what you can actually see on screen. For what the NUC 7 is actually intended for, office applications, media, that kind of thing, it's perfect. It's also relatively cheap too. If it's still the same price it was when I last checked a couple of weeks back, you can get this for roughly £70-ish on eBay here in the UK. Add to that a little bit more RAM if you need it, and some more storage as well, which is also relatively cheap these days as well. Then you're going to have the perfect little mini PC. It can even do some very light gaming as well if you don't mind the performance issues that you saw earlier on. Considering what this is though, the fact that it could still perform to the level it did was pretty impressive. One thing in particular I was really impressed with about the NUC 7 is that it could even do 4K 60 YouTube, which again considering the specs of this thing is insane. I was expecting 1080p 60 to be the max, so anything higher than that I thought it was going to be drop frame central, but it simply wasn't. But yeah, overall I'm really impressed with the little NUC 7, especially considering the price. You should hopefully be able to get this for it because I'm recording this before I've checked the price, which you saw only a moment ago. But yeah, I also wanted to point out another little feature which I didn't actually realise it had until after I started testing, was that it has a cool little blue LED light that goes around the front I/O here. This actually fits really well with the kind of colour scheme of the NUC, the colour of the metal that the body of the NUC 7 actually uses. So that was a nice little surprise as well. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe to the channel, especially if you'd like to see more content like this. This is also a first for me because I've never done a review of something in this style. It'll improve things as time goes on, but yeah, I really enjoyed making a review in this style, so hopefully you all enjoyed it too, whether you're interested in little mini PCs or not. That'll be it for today. I'll put various links down in the description below to like Patreon or Ko-fi if you want to support me in creating these videos. But for now, thanks for watching the video today and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.